kind introduction. You having a good conference so far? Good, good. Let me ask you, what matters most to you? What matters most in your life? I'm going to guess it's not your car or your clothes or even your house. What's most important in your life? Your health? Your family? Your loved ones? Well, what if I were to say that there's a pretty good chance that you could lose everything and everyone who was most important to you? I don't mean that they're gone or that you're gone, but that your connection with them is broken, and so you've lost them forever. Let me show you what I mean, starting with my own family. These are my mother's parents. That's Walter and Irene. And Walter was a physician in a little Midwestern town. And this was back before there was health insurance. So he would treat a patient, and sometimes they would pay him with a chicken or a side of beef or some cheese or something like that. And it wasn't a terribly healthy lifestyle. And at about age 60, my grandpa had a heart attack. And not too long after that, it was pretty clear there was something more wrong with him than just what had happened in his heart. He had never had any memory problems before, but he started to become forgetful, and he would seem confused, and sometimes he would start wandering around town without knowing where he was headed. A patient would pick him up in the car and bring him back home, and by his mid-60s he was dead. Now, my grandmother, Irene, lived a lot longer. But she had a very similar end of her life where we'd go visit her. And I remember she would say, Neil, I'm reading this magazine and it's so frustrating. I get to the end of an article and I can't remember the beginning of it anymore. And her memory was bothering her, but it got worse and worse. And it got to the point where she didn't know us when we would come to visit. And she just sat in the corner of her room and her heart was beating, but all the connections were broken. This is my father's side of the family. They were in the cattle business, and not the healthiest lifestyle perhaps, but that's the way it was back then. And both of my grandparents on my father's side lived a long life, but they had the same problem. They both started to lapse into dementia, telling the same stories over and over again, not knowing their family anymore. And for years, they just sat in the corner of a room with zero connection before they finally died. This is my dad. Now, my dad grew up in the cattle business. He didn't like it, and so he left, and he was in the military for a while, and then he became a physician, and he spent his life treating diabetes in Fargo, North Dakota. And when my dad was in his late 60s or thereabouts, he started to say, I am forgetful. And my dad was a doctor, so he knew what this meant. And as time went on, he started to talk about his impending dementia. And then as time went on, he couldn't verbalize it anymore, and he started to really sink into serious memory problems. His personality started to change. He became mute, and when he died in February, we realized that he had been gone to us for a really long time. Now, how many of you have family members or friends or people that you've known who've had dementia or serious problems? It's everywhere. But unlike weight problems or diabetes or heart problems, where we know that there's a role for food, almost nobody imagines that there's something you could do to protect the most important thing, which is your brain and your ability to connect with your loved ones. So Alzheimer's disease attacks half of us by age 85, and if you look at the cost, or if you look at the numbers, it was $1 million, then it was $2 million, then it's $5 million, and then it's going off the scale. And the dollars and cents, if you take a person who does not have dementia, but is over 65, their annual health care costs, not quite $14,000, but a person who has dementia, well, their costs are $44,000 per year, one person per year. That's if residential care isn't part of it. If a person needs to be in residential treatment, $70,000 per year is average today. So it bankrupts the individual, it drains all the money from your family, but the most important thing is the personal costs are just incalculable. And it doesn't have to be dementia. You don't have to be older. How many of you ever said, what was the name of that actor there. It was on the tip of my tongue. You can't think of it. Or you're going into a grocery store and you see somebody at the other end of the aisle. I know that person, but what's his name? You sort of duck into another aisle to try to think. And of course, there you run into somebody else you ought to know. These things happen to us all the time. Well, I want to talk with you about how we learn, how we remember things, how this starts to go wrong, and what we can do to kind of bolt our memory down a little bit so we keep it for as long as the rest of us is alive. Now, at the middle of this picture, there's a little red crescent thing called the hippocampus. This is going to be on the test. Hippocampus is Latin for seahorse. The early anatomists thought it looked like a seahorse. Explain it to me, I don't know. But anyway, the hippocampus has a very important job. It has to decide what you will remember and what you can safely, not worry about. So you're at a restaurant, and the waiter comes up and says, "Hello, my name is Kelly," and the hippocampus thinks, no, forget that. Okay, movie times, no, we don't need that. There's a lot of stuff the hippocampus just rules out and says, not important. But things that are important, what it does is it sends it up to the cerebral cortex, and that's where memories are coded and saved. However, when you learn a new fact, you don't make a new brain cell to stick that fact into. If you did, your brain would be so enormous you'd have to carry it around in a wheelbarrow. When you learn new facts, you make links, you make connections, you make synapses from one cell to the next. So here's a new friend. Hi, my name is John. We make connections between these. And at first, a connection starts out as a tenuous little string from one cell to the next, but it becomes stronger and stronger. So there's a little rickety bridge. The more times you meet John and you connect John's face, pretty soon it becomes a superhighway. And that's a person that you're not going to forget, hopefully. The problem is, bridges break, or they get congested. And if that bridge isn't connecting anymore, you see the face, the name is just not there. And facts all start falling out of your head. So at first, this can be lapses. This can happen at any age. You're a little tired. You're not well nourished. You're not sleeping well. The bridges don't function necessarily. But if it starts to really become frequent and you're having lots of memory problems, the doctor will say, well, this is mild cognitive impairment. You're still yourself, but it's taking a little longer to get through your checkbook, or words are falling out here and there. But then you might be saying, I think I might have the beginnings of Alzheimer's disease. Could that be? Doctors look for 5 things. They first look for, can you learn and remember? Then can you reason things out and solve problems? They also look for what's called visual spatial ability. Can you recognize shapes? If I ask you to draw a clock, can you get the numbers in order and that kind of thing? Then they also look at language, and then they look at personality. If all 5 of those things are goofing up, then doctors say, I think this could be Alzheimer's disease. All right. You go to the doctor. You say, I don't want that. My parents had Alzheimer's disease. My father had. I don't want this. And the doctor sits you down and they say, well, it's genetic. You should pick different parents. That's what you can do. Well, here are the numbers. If one parent gives you this gene called the ApoE4 allele, if you get that from one parent, you have 3 times the risk of Alzheimer's disease compared to not having it. And if you got it from both parents, you've got between 10 and 15 times the risk. And that's the end of the story for most people. Nothing you can do, just wait and see what happens. Wait a minute. Turns out there's a lot you can do. Anybody know what this is? That is Chicago, exactly. And the reason I'm showing you Chicago is back in 1993 an important study began called the Chicago Health and Aging Project. And they brought in a large group, thousands of healthy people, and they carefully tracked what they were eating. And then, as 1 year and another year and another year and another year went by, they looked at links between what they had been eating and who stayed mentally clear and who did not. And the first thing that they tracked was something that I knew about when I was a kid. When I was growing up in Fargo, North Dakota, I'd run down to the kitchen. My mom would be cooking bacon. And her 5 kids would gather around, and she would take a fork and carefully pull the bacon strips out of the pan and put them on a paper towel to drain. And when all the bacon was out of the pan, she had a pan filled with hot grease that she was not going to throw away, right? So she would take that hot bacon grease and carefully pour it into a jar to save it. Now, the bacon grease jar did not go in the refrigerator. She just put it on the shelf because she knew that as bacon grease cools down, what happens to it? It solidifies, right? It turns into this waxy solid. And the next day she would spoon it back into the frying pan and fry eggs in it. It's amazing that any of her kids lived to adulthood, but that's what we did. The fact that bacon grease is solid at room temperature is a sign that it's very high in what is called saturated fat. You've heard of saturated fat, right? This is the kind that raises your cholesterol. Well, it's in bacon, it's also in butter and other dairy products, and it's in meat. And these were things that we ate every day in growing up in Fargo, and maybe you grew up with the same kind of pattern. And that was the first thing that the researchers at Chicago started keying in on. Some people ate relatively little saturated fat, 13 grams a day. Others got about twice that amount, 25 grams a day. And they looked at who got Alzheimer's disease and who didn't. And here are the numbers. The people who got the 25 grams a day had more than 3 times the Alzheimer's risk compared to the others. Okay, so that's our first clue. And it's relatively easy to get up to that 25 grams a day. If I take a couple of eggs, that's 3 grams of saturated fat. Let me add a strip of bacon, that's another gram. Let me take a chicken thigh. Even without the skin, it's about 5 grams of saturated. Did you know that chicken has a substantial amount of fat? About 5 grams in a chicken thigh with no skin. Glass of milk, another 5 grams. Oh yeah, pizza. Okay, so 1 pizza for 1 is about 12, and you add that up, I'm in the high-risk group. Do you know anybody who eats that way? Everybody eats that way. This is the way Americans eat. Okay, but it's not just Alzheimer's disease. Researchers in Finland said, what about this mild cognitive impairment? You remember me talking about this condition where you're still yourself, but your memory is starting to be bad. They brought in a group of people, and they were 50 years old when they brought them in. They tracked them up into their 70s, and they looked at who got mild cognitive dementia, who didn't. And they tracked their saturated fat. Some were low, some were high in saturated fat. And here are the numbers. The people who got this bad fat had a lot more of the mild cognitive impairment also. So there's something about bacon grease and dairy fat and so forth that is harming the brain. Now, what about people who have that gene? Remember the ApoE epsilon 4 allele, the one that condemns you? Well, they looked at those folks. Some people who had that gene avoided bad fat. Some people who had the gene didn't avoid them, and they had a high fat intake. Here are the numbers. Dramatic difference. So, in other words, the people who had the gene, but they were avoiding the bad fats, tended to keep their memory. The people who had the gene and ate the bacon grease and so forth, their memories went. Is this making sense? Okay. So, what about that? What about that? Well, you go into a typical donut shop, and the donuts are frying in, you know about trans fats, right? Partially hydrogenated oil. This is the shortening they put in there. It's solid when they put it in. It heats up and it liquefies, and it has that mouth feel that people like. It's in a lot of snack foods. And in Chicago, some people ate relatively little. Some people ate a lot of it. And here are the numbers. Dramatic difference. Okay, so about 5 times the risk if you indulge in a lot of these trans fats versus not indulging in it. Now, when doctors saw those numbers, when the research community saw those numbers, they were horrified because they thought, how many Americans are eating these bad fats, not just, every day, a few times a day. These are routine. We feed them to kids. When I saw those numbers, I was thrilled because it means we can choose what we're going to eat starting right this minute. And we can start pushing the odds in our own favor. All right, so there are 3 steps for using power foods for the brain. The first is to skip the bad fats. The second is to knock out free radicals. In a minute I'm going to tell you what they are. And the third thing is to exercise your brain. We're going to cover all of them. Okay, first let's start with skipping the bad fats. All right, so I'm in Chicago and I'm eating all these bad things. Can I make some changes? Well, I better, because my risk of Alzheimer's is high. So what can I do? Let me get rid of that glass of milk. How about that? We'll get rid of that and we'll have, how many have tasted almond milk? It's fine, right? Very tasty, has no saturated fat. So if the numbers in Chicago apply to me, I just cut my risk of Alzheimer's disease because I got away from the saturated fat. Can I do better than that? Can I get rid of more foods? Yeah. Easily, sure. Let's get rid of that bacon. How about having veggie bacon instead? Let's get rid of the eggs. How about a big bowl of oatmeal with blueberries and strawberries? Let's get rid of that chicken thigh. I'll have a big submarine sandwich filled with all the veggies. And how am I going to do? Well, if the research numbers apply to me, my Alzheimer's risk just fell even more. Is there something else that I can change? Oh yeah, what about that pizza? Could I get a vegan pizza? You know, pizza is a delivery vehicle for cheese. And so, you know it's true. So we're going to get rid of that. We're going to bring in the vegan pizza. And now, how am I doing? Well, I can't tell you because nobody in Chicago eats that well. But, however, there are some people who eat that well. In Loma Linda, California, diets vary dramatically. And people at Loma Linda University tracked a group of what they called heavy meat eaters. And over a 6-year period, they looked at who was gradually losing their brain function. And they compared them with a group of vegetarians. The vegetarians did a whole lot better. Okay? All right. So, by the way, you do need some fat, right? This is not a zero-fat diet, and the brain actually does need some good fats. So which fat is best for the brain? Is it A, corn oil, B, peanut oil, C, sunflower oil, or D, olive oil? The answer is broccoli. I bet you didn't realize this. Broccoli has a kind, and not just broccoli has a kind of fat called alpha-linolenic acid, which is essential for the body. Now, there's not a lot of fat in broccoli, but what there is tends to be fairly high in alpha-linolenic acid. If you compare the animal products, they're loaded with fat. Broccoli is about 8% fat as a percentage of its calories, but a lot of that fat is in this essential form of alpha-linolenic acid that gradually lengthens to the kind the brain will thank you for. And it has virtually none of the bad fat. It doesn't have the saturated fat, doesn't have the trans fats. So you'll find it not only in broccoli, but you'll find it in all of the dark green vegetables. And so this is a commercial to have lots of them. You don't have to have oil slathering all over your foods to get good fats, but there's more of it in walnuts and flax seeds. If you got a thing of canola oil, it's absolutely bursting with alpha-linolenic acid. And you'll even see omega-3 supplements at the store. I'm not saying you need them, but there are vegan ALA, DHA supplements and so forth that you can have if you wish. My main commercial is put the green leafy vegetables front and center in your diet. All right? By the way, let's say I get away from bad fats. I cut my Alzheimer's risk. Are there some other benefits of making that diet change? Of course, all kinds of things. First of all, a gram of fat has 9 calories. You already know this already, right? And a gram of carbohydrate has only 4. So if I'm getting away from all those fatty foods, what's going to happen to my waistline? I want to show you a picture. This is a Frenchman who moved to Canada, and he sent me these pictures. He sent me these pictures because he had weighed over 300 pounds. Went to the doctor, and the doctor says, I've got some not such good news for you. You've got pre-diabetes, and if you keep this up, I know exactly where you're headed. As fate would have it, his wife had a copy of a book that I wrote about diabetes. She gave it to him, and it did not say, don't eat bread. You know, the usual kind of diabetic thing, you know, don't eat carbohydrate. It didn't say that. My book says, get away from the foods that are loaded with bad fat. Don't eat meat, dairy products, eggs. Keep the oils to a bare minimum. Choose the healthy carbs. Vegan, plant-based diet. By the time he got to chapter 4, he sent me this picture. And the other thing, when you lose a lot of weight, not only, I mean, the pre-diabetes was history, and it was completely reversed. And when you lose all that weight, something else happens. Your energy starts to go up. And people who never felt like exercising, suddenly you feel alive, and you feel like doing things you couldn't do before. This is Jenna, same story. She really didn't feel like herself, and she made a diet change, not counting calories, but changing the type of food that she ate. Plant-based diet, lost the weight, got her waistline back, got her confidence back, got her health back. And that's what really counts. So you might be doing it for your brain, but your waistline is going to change too. Arteries will open up again. You know the work of Dr. Dean Ornish, who showed 20 years ago that a plant-based diet, along with other healthy lifestyle changes, will open up those arteries again. Cancer risk drops about maybe 40% or thereabouts. Diabetes gets better. In some cases, it absolutely flat out goes away. I got to tell you, I got an email about 2 weeks ago. There was a man in London who was diagnosed with diabetes, and he heard about the vegan approach, and he tried it out, and he was very good. He followed the diet, got rid of all the animal products, was eating his vegetables and beans and things, went to the doctor, got some blood tests, and was on his way home. As soon as he got there, the phone rang. The doctor needs to see you back in the office. If there's something on your blood test, the doctor needs to talk with you right away. So he gets back in his car and he's driving back thinking, uh-oh, what did they find? What catastrophe is in my future? He goes down to the doctor's office. The doctor sits him down and says, tell me what you've been doing with your diet. All traces of diabetes are gone. He had never seen this before. And he told this patient, who then related it to me, as every doctor is taught, once you're a diabetic, you're always a diabetic. It's a one-way street, that's it. He had never ever seen it reversed. The guy needed no medication. All the blood tests were totally normal. And the doctor was convinced it was a fluke, brought him back 2 months later, gone. It's gone. This is very much a two-way street. The sooner we get to this, the sooner we can make it go away. All right. Joint pain for a lot of people, their arthritis just improves. Blood pressure goes down. Medications, the need for medication is much, much less. But the most important thing is that we had thought we can now do what we had thought was impossible, which is that we can prevent, we believe, or reduce the odds of Alzheimer's disease. So what are these bad fats doing? What are they doing to the brain? What is it that they're doing to destroy our memories? Well, first of all, you know bad fats raise cholesterol, right? So if you're eating a lot of bacon grease, your cholesterol will be higher. Could it be something about cholesterol? Well, researchers at Kaiser Permanente tracked cholesterol levels in a group of people and looked to see who got Alzheimer's. And there's a direct correlation. So the higher your cholesterol, the higher your risk. So that's part of it. And that makes sense. Because cholesterol can block the arteries in your heart. But your brain is the heart's favorite organ. 20% of the blood flow coming out of the heart goes straight up to the brain. And if I can't get blood and oxygen and nutrients into the brain, and if I don't get blood flow up there to carry the wastes away, is my brain function going to be normal? You need those arteries wide open. And if you eat the bad fat, you have a high cholesterol, and you block the carotid arteries or the vertebral arteries, you don't have good blood flow. But there's more to it than that. If I look into the brain, in between the brain cells, in between the neurons, are these little balls of yarn, or sort of like meatballs, in a person who's got Alzheimer's disease. Those are called beta amyloid plaques, and they are the hallmark of Alzheimer's disease. How do they get there? Well, what they're made of is protein. Little protein strands come out of the brain cells. It's sort of like a sausage maker. The little protein strands come out, and then they clump together in these little balls of yarn or little meatballs that we call beta amyloid plaques. And they start destroying the connections from one cell to the next. So what's in them? Well, there's protein. That's my sausage maker. There's also cholesterol in those plaques. But there's something else. There's iron in them. And there is copper. And there are other metals. And that's, this is something you wouldn't think of. There's copper, iron building up in my brain. How could that be? I've never heard of that. Well, here's what's going on. You need iron normally, right? You know you have to have iron, a certain amount of iron in your diet. Why? Because your body takes the iron, makes hemoglobin out of it. That's what makes red blood cells red, and it carries oxygen from place to place, including to your brain. So you need a certain amount of iron to do that. But if you have too much iron, it's toxic. So researchers in Chicago looked at people who had low hemoglobin levels and high hemoglobin levels, looking at hemoglobin as an index of iron. And it turned out that if you were either too low or too high, your brain function started to be compromised. The perfect hemoglobin level was 13.7, and if you were right around there, you did well. Well, why would a person be low? Why would a person be low in iron? Well, one reason is milk. Did you know that? Milk blocks iron absorption. It cuts it by about half. If you have a glass of milk with a meal, it cuts iron absorption by about half. Why would a person be high? Well, because they grew up like I did, with steak or roast beef or pork chops, and so you get too much highly absorbable iron. The foods that give you the amount of iron you need without the excess, the ones your body really was designed for, are beans and greens. The beans and greens have a form of iron called non-heme iron that's more absorbable if you're low, it's less absorbable if you're high. It tries to keep you right in the middle. Add dairy products, you're going to run low. Add meat, you're going to tend to run high. Okay. Now, copper. Nobody thinks about copper, but you need copper in your diet to make certain enzymes that run your body, that are essential to metabolism. But the research team that I mentioned earlier looked at copper intake. The people who got the most copper, in a minute I'm going to show you which foods had it. The people who got the most lost brain function much more aggressively. So where is it coming from? How many people have a cast iron pan? If I take a cast iron pan and I cook foods in it, does some of the iron get into the foods? Yeah, it does. That's an advantage if you're low in iron. It's a disadvantage if you're high. How many people have copper pipes? Okay, so the water is sitting in my copper pipes, and then in the morning I fill my coffee maker. Is copper getting into the water? Absolutely. So you can use a stainless steel pan, and you can use bottled water or a water filter. If you're eating meat, if you're eating liver, you get a boatload of copper and iron. How many people take a one-a-day vitamin or some kind of daily multiple vitamin? If you look at the label, it'll surprise you. Almost all of them have iron and copper added to it, because they made the assumption that you're not getting these in any foods that you're eating all day long. They are driving you into excess. In fact, one of the biggest sources of unnecessary copper that we see in thinking people's diets, well-educated people's diets, is they're dutifully taking their multiple vitamins. So, go to the store, get a multiple vitamin, but read the label, get the ones without the added minerals. Or you can get individual vitamins. You only need, basically you need B12, you might need D, but you don't need lots and lots of different vitamins. Okay? Alright, so iron and copper are bad. Why? What are they doing in my brain? Well, you could see what they do. Take your cast iron pan, go out on your picnic table, leave the pan there, and 2 or 3 days later come back after it's rained. What's happened to the iron? It's rusting. That's oxidation. That's a sign that iron happens to be very unstable, and it oxidizes very, very easily. The iron in your body oxidizes too, and when it does, it produces what are called free radicals. You've heard of free radicals. Free radicals are innocent molecules like oxygen molecules, but in your body they lose an electron, or they get electrons in unstable orbits because of the oxidation process, and then they're like little piranhas or sparks. They're just knocking out whatever they come in contact with. Okay? So free radicals are normal oxygen molecules or other molecules that have gone through this process of becoming destabilized, and iron facilitates that. Does copper oxidize? Well, take a nice shiny new penny, and what's that penny going to look like in 20 years? Well, it gets darker. That's oxidation. So copper and iron are very similar. They oxidize very regularly, very readily. And when they do that, they release these free radicals that destroy your brain. The point I'm making is in the brain of a person with Alzheimer's disease are those little meatballs, those amyloid plaques, and in them are iron and copper that are showering sparks into their brain, destroying the connections and destroying their ability to recognize their loved ones. That's what's going on. So, away it goes. That's when I need to stop. So, can I knock out the free radicals? Is there something I can do to defend myself? Sure. You've heard of antioxidants. Antioxidants, there's many, many of them. But take vitamin E. It's in green vegetables, it's in mangoes, it's in lots of foods, and in huge amounts in nuts and seeds as well. And the Chicago researchers looked at people who got low levels of vitamin E and those who got a high amount of vitamin E, and they did the same test. Who's going to get Alzheimer's, who's not? And the difference was huge. The people who neglected their vitamin E had double the risk or more of Alzheimer's compared to people who got a lot of vitamin E. So it's working. You eat the antioxidants in your food. They knock out the free radicals and they protect you. So where do you find it? It's in lots of vegetables, lots of fruits, and much more in various nuts and seeds. But I have a couple caveats. The first is food, not pills. If you go to the store and get a vitamin E supplement, it does not have all of the vitamin E forms that nature made. It has the ones that the manufacturer was able to synthesize or gather, and they stuck them in there. But nature has a whole balanced array of them that you want to take advantage of. The second thing is you don't have to overdo it. 1 ounce of nuts or seeds has about 5 milligrams of vitamin E. So an ounce of nuts or seeds, if I put them in the palm of my hand, that's about an ounce. Once it hits your fingers, it's more than an ounce. So a lot of folks, they wildly overdo it with these things, and they end up getting a lot of problems that you've heard about already. Okay? So what's a healthy diet? It's vegetables and fruits and whole grains and legumes. Those are the foods that give you the iron and copper you need without the excess. Those are the foods that don't have saturated fat. Those are the foods that don't have trans fats. Those are the foods that don't have any cholesterol. These are the foods that protect the brain. Okay. Who eats that way? Does anybody eat that way? Well, you've heard of the blue, do you know the blue zones? You heard of that? These are areas where people live to be 100. Sardinia, parts of Costa Rica. There are many people who live very long lives, and the granddaddy of them all is Okinawa. Okinawa is at the bottom of Japan. And anybody know what the dietary staple of Okinawa is? Very good. It's not fish, it's not rice, it's sweet potatoes. Huge amounts of sweet potatoes. And this is masu in the middle. This picture could have been taken anywhere except it was taken in a country where people eat lots of sweet potatoes. And as time went on, here's Masu at 88. Here she is at 100. By the way, in Okinawa, when you're 100, it's not that remarkable, but you do get a party. And you have to share your party with everyone else who's turned 100. There's lots of people. This is Ellsworth Wareham. He is a physician, but he, in World War II, was sailing by on a destroyer right by Okinawa. He didn't know Masu, but if you looked at what they were eating, it was almost identical. The reason is he grew up on a farm in Alberta. And he had to milk the cows and take the eggs from the chickens, and he said, it's not very hygienic. And so when the milk was in a glass next to him, he sort of tried to push it away a little bit. And then when they would kill one of the calves, it was invariably like his favorite calf. So he developed a taste for green beans. And he became vegetarian early in life. Well, when he got out of the military, he became quite a well-known physician and a cardiovascular surgeon, and made quite a reputation for himself. He did a tour of duty in Vietnam. He was decorated by, that's him right next to Lyndon Johnson. And again, that's him to the left of Richard Nixon. So he was big stuff. He was a very famous thoracic surgeon, cardiothoracic surgeon. But what was most remarkable about Dr. Ellsworth Wareham was when he reached 65 and the other doctors were reaching their mid-60s and they were all talking about retirement, he was better than ever. And when he reached 70 and 72 and 75, the other doctors were all retired, but he was still going strong. And he reached 80 and he finally said, I can't do this forever. If I hit 95, I'm retiring for sure. And that's what he did. When he reached 95, he retired. And the other doctor said, wait, you can't leave. You've got more experience than anybody. We'll pay your insurance. You got to stay with us. They had never had such an experienced doctor in this whole hospital. He said, boys, I'm leaving. I'm going home. So I actually had lunch with Dr. Wareham a couple months ago. And he's doing great. But he told me a secret. He's still operating on the bushes outside his house. So the point being this: why not stay physically strong, mentally clear? You're not going to live forever, but for as long as your heart is beating, let's keep that brain working so you can be sharp, so that you can really fully invest in what you're doing. Now, let me take you on the edge of science a little bit. There are a couple of other culprits that I want you to be aware of. Have you heard about aluminum being a possible problem? The evidence is like this. 88 county districts in Britain. Some of them had water with relatively low levels of aluminum. Some of them had a lot of aluminum in their water. And then they looked at Alzheimer's risk, and it was about 50% higher in the high aluminum counties. Same thing in France. Exactly the same kind of test. People who had a lot of aluminum in their water had more Alzheimer's. And researchers also found when you look in the brain of a person who has died with Alzheimer's, in those plaques, you find not only beta amyloid protein, iron, copper, but also aluminum, and a fair amount of it. But other researchers say, forget it. It's just a coincidence. It doesn't really matter. Go ahead and have it. My suggestion is let them fight it out. You avoid the aluminum. Because aluminum, unlike iron, has zero biological role in the body. Your body does nothing whatsoever good with aluminum. You don't need it. So where am I getting it? It's in water. And by the way, it's not in water bubbling down a mountain stream. It's added at your local water treatment plant. They add it. They add aluminum to try to precipitate out sediment in the water, but traces of the aluminum are there when you turn on your faucet. And now a water filter will remove it. If it's a reverse osmosis filter, the cheapo filters tend not to remove it, unfortunately. So good reason for bottled water or a reverse osmosis filter. Aluminum pots and pans, if it's coated, fine. But if the aluminum is in touch with the food, the aluminum will get into the food. If you go to the store and get baking powder, you will see two kinds. One kind has aluminum, the other is aluminum free, and it says so right on the label. Simple. You pick the aluminum free. If you get a pizza, this frozen pizza, I hope you don't, but many frozen pizzas for some reason have aluminum in the crust or in the cheese. The little salt and sugar packets that are single serve, they often have aluminum added to keep it from caking up when it's humid. My dad had an acid stomach. He always had a bottle of Maalox there. And Maalox is an antacid that neutralizes acid. And one day I read the label. And do you know what Maalox stands for? Magnesium and aluminum hydroxide. You're just drinking aluminum day after day in phenomenal quantities. If instead you bought Tums or some other non-aluminum antacid, you're not getting any exposure to it at all. Very easy. If you take a deodorant, it does not have aluminum. If you use an antiperspirant, it does have aluminum. It goes through the skin, hits the brain. So the point being, you can choose once you're aware of the choices to make. So, a little extra power here. Folate. Folate is a B vitamin. Vitamin B6 in beans, also in bananas, and vitamin B12 you're all aware of. Researchers tried this trio of vitamins, working together to see what they would do for people's brain health. This was at the University of Oxford, and they used them not as foods in this case, they used them as supplements, as a test. And what they showed is that a group of people, they looked at their brain atrophy as time went on. A little hard to see the atrophy in the brain. This hole is normal. That's totally normal. That's the ventricles where the cerebrospinal fluid is. What's abnormal is there's a little blue edge there, and that's the part that's atrophying. And people who went into the study and they got a placebo pill with no vitamins, they were losing about 2.5% of their brain. The people who were getting the B vitamins, and again, the size of the ventricle is not the issue. The fact is, you don't see that blue there. So the atrophy was virtually arrested. Now, what are these vitamins doing? What they're doing is they're knocking out a toxic chemical in your brain. It's called homocysteine. Every doctor knows about it. Homocysteine is sort of factory exhaust. Cells make it. And if it builds up to a high level, it's toxic to your heart. It's toxic to your brain. It's easy to measure. When it's high, the doctor says, here's your treatment. You take your B vitamins and away it goes. But you can eat foliage, which has the folate, beans, bananas, which have the B6, and B12 supplement. Very, very easy. Your homocysteine comes way, way down, and the toxic effect, you just dodged the bullet. Very easy. Memory got better in this group, by the way. You hear people talk about the Mediterranean diet because it is vegetable rich, and instead of lots and lots of meat, there's more of an emphasis on plant-based foods. And also some people talk about the alcohol part of it. When I was in college, I think a lot of my roommates felt that they were following the Mediterranean diet. It's true. When people drink a little bit, their risk of Alzheimer's is slightly less than if they don't drink at all, or they drink a lot, they do worse than people who drink just a little bit. But researchers said, wait a minute, what if it's not the alcohol? What if it's the grape? What if that's what's doing it? So they brought in a group of people and they asked them to drink grape juice. This was the University of Cincinnati. They asked a group of people, they were 78 years old. Everybody already had this mild cognitive impairment. They were starting to lose their memory. And what they asked them to do was have grape juice. Very simple. How much? 1 pint a day. That's 2 cups. Cup in the morning, cup at night, very easy. And they showed that their ability to learn was much better. Their ability to recall was better. Very rapidly, within a couple of weeks, it starts improving. Why? Well, if you think about it, a grape is sitting in the sun. It's on a vine. It's sitting in the sun all day, every day, getting assaulted by the elements. Why doesn't it just wither up and turn into a raisin instantly? The reason it can survive is it has anthocyanins. That's what makes it dark. That's the dark color. It's not there to make it look pretty. It's there to protect it. In the same way as when you walk into the produce counter, oh, those orange carrots are so beautiful. They may be beautiful, but that orange is beta-carotene there to protect the carrot. The tomatoes are so beautifully red. That's lycopene to protect the tomato. And that dark anthocyanin color protects the grape. If when you eat it, it does pass into your bloodstream, it does go to the brain, it's a powerful antioxidant that protects the grape as it's growing, it protects your brain. Well, wait a minute. Are there other little round fruits that are dark colored that I could add to my diet? Well, how about, let's say blueberries, okay? Same story. Back into the laboratory. The researchers brought in a group of people, gave them a pint of blueberry juice every day, and the same story. Their learning was better, their recall was better. So these plants that have been with us for thousands and thousands of years, and our biology is designed to take advantage of it. The antioxidants get into your body knows what to do. Modern life takes us away. We eat a hamburger, or we eat French fries, or we eat onion rings, or we eat a cheese pizza. There aren't any anthocyanins in that. All these things that we have depended on to protect us are not part of our culture anymore. As soon as they are, you get protected. Okay, so we've talked about skipping the bad fats, we've talked about the free radicals. The last thing, I want to talk about exercising your brain. Very important. You know that exercise is good for your heart. Well, what's good about it? It gets your heart beating, so that gets oxygen into the tissues, that gets the waste out. Researchers at the University of Illinois brought in 120 people. And they asked them to do something really simple. Exercise 3 times a week. Just walking. They started out at 10 minutes, 3 times a week, and they worked their way up to 40. And what they showed is that the brain shrinkage that we've kind of gotten used to happening in older people, it was not just arrested, it was reversed. It was like pumping the brain back up with physical activity. And their memory got noticeably better. And especially the hippocampus, which is Latin for seahorse, which is very important for deciding what's worth remembering. The hippocampus actually recovers to a degree as well. Okay? That's what exercise will do. So, now, Jeff asked me to give you my exercise tips, and some of you might have heard me say something like, I run about 3 miles 3 times a week. Nonsense. I want to show you my real exercise tips. Go to the airport as late as possible before your flight. carry massively heavy luggage, and run like hell. And I do that about 3 times a week. Now, when you get there, don't do this. Do not do this. Don't go through don't go through that thing. Why? I'm not saying it's dangerous. What I'm saying is you're missing an opportunity. Ask for the pat down. And then when you get the pat down, the guys look at you can put like DVDs and books and recipes and things that they find and they pull out and they confiscate. So, you with me? I've got TSA people who are vegan every airport I go through. Okay? And I want you to do that too. If you have a shirt that says "Go Vegan," they're all going to say, "Tell me about that vegan diet." And you got time. Put up your PowerPoint, give them a little brief lecture, leave them a bumper sticker. Okay. All right. So how do I begin? The way I begin is you see your doctor. Make sure your heart is up to it. If you've got any concern, make sure your heart is okay. Make sure your joints are okay. If you've got any history of those problems, start with a 10-minute brisk walk. Who can't do that? Real easy. Then you work up the next day. You work up to 15, 20, 25. Do not focus on distance. What we focus on is our pulse. I want my pulse to go higher, because if the pulse is higher, I'm oxygenating my brain. As long as that's happening, I don't care where you go, I don't care what you're doing, you're getting good aerobic exercise. So, 10 minutes this week, 3 times, 15 minutes next week. Once you're up to 40, that's what has been shown to work in research studies to get the brain pumped up. Can you do more than that? Absolutely. The more fit you get, you'll discover it just becomes self-fulfilling, and you can go and go and go and go, and you're going to absolutely love it. Okay, now it's not just physical activity, mental activity as well. So intellectual things, watching documentaries, reading newspapers. What these are doing is they're solidifying the connections within our brains. So the more newspapers you read, be selective. Doing crosswords or doing the Sudoku or doing anagrams, playing with words. Those are the things that exercise our connections between cells. I was sitting in a lecture. Dr. Dean Ornish, who I think is just a genius, he was talking about his work to help people to reverse heart disease, and then his wonderful work with men with prostate cancer and so forth. And he showed this slide, and he made this point, that if you focus on me, if I focus on I'm likely to be ill. If I focus on the group, if I focus on the we, I can be well. And he was making a good point, that you want to invoke the group support. But while he was making that important point, I was in the back of the room thinking, that's cool. There's words stuck in other words. And I got really preoccupied with it. And so my brain started firing with all the different things that you can turn words into. It's really amazing. You can do it with almost any kind of word. So, have fun with it. So, the whole idea is to keep those connections alive and exercise them a little bit, okay? Oh, by the way, if you have 2 words for everything, if you're bilingual, you're going to do better. Research studies have shown that can delay cognitive decline by about 5 years. If you have 3 languages, even better. Now, your high school French will not help you, I'm sorry to say, unless you're using it now. What counts is using it. And it doesn't matter how old you are, you can pick up linguistic things, and that just keeps the neurons firing, and it keeps them resilient. There's a study called the ACTIVE study, and they set out to actually train people in an organized way to protect their brains. Large group of people, about 3,000, they trained them in memory. They trained them in reasoning, like problem solving, and also processing speed, and they tested them 5 years later. And they showed that this kind of training counted between 7 and 14 years of aging. So it really does. I'll show you what it is in a minute. It really works. The bad thing is, the only thing that benefits is the area you were trained in. So if you train in memory, your memory's good. If you train in problem solving, your problem solving is improved. If you train in processing speed, your reaction time stays fast. But you've got to cross-train. So here's what they do. This is a company in San Francisco called Lumosity. And you can go online and try this. I'm working in a beachside eatery, and David comes up and he places an order. Then a few minutes later he comes back. If I remember his name, if I remember what he ordered, I get a tip. And it's just a little game that specifically is intended to promote those brain areas that we need to protect. I feed the fish, you click on each one, but then the fish move. So you have to try to keep track of them. Or how many words begin with D-I-G. These are games that are designed to build up certain parts of brain function, and you can do this for free. Very, very simple. And then eventually they'll ask you to pay for it, but you could try it. You could try it out for nothing. This is Lumos. It's good company. So the most important thing about physical activity or intellectual activity is to stop. To rest. You have to stop. Your brain can't handle it if you just keep going. When I was in medical school, the third year of medical school is when you go in the hospital and you see patients for the first time. And the schedule starts Monday morning at 8 o'clock. And you work Monday morning, Monday afternoon, Monday night, Tuesday morning, Tuesday afternoon. You go home Tuesday night. And you collapse. And Wednesday's a normal day, 8 to 6. Thursday, you work Thursday night, Friday, and then Friday afternoon, and then you go home and collapse. Saturday is a normal day, 8 to 6. Sunday, you work Sunday morning, Sunday night, Monday, and it's all year long. And you might be horrified that your medical care is in the hands of someone who is massively sleep deprived. But what I noticed was all of the interns, all the medical students carried clipboards because they could not remember anything. They couldn't remember anything. They had to write down every single thing. When you go to sleep, your brain says, great. Every word, every fact, every interaction is like a new file folder getting thrown down on your desk. It's piled high. When you go to sleep and you stop, the brain files it away so that you can retrieve it later. If you never sleep, all your experiences and learning is in a big jumble and you can't find it. So here's the way it works. At the beginning of the night, the first half of the night, if I hooked you up to an EEG, an electroencephalogram, it's slow wave sleep. Relatively slow waves are shown. That's when your brain is integrating words, integrating facts. The second half of the night, you know about REM sleep? Rapid eye movement sleep? Okay. You're dreaming. Dreams are especially accentuated then. And have you noticed how dreams often have sort of an odd emotional content? And your brain is integrating emotions. Your brain is also integrating physical things that you have done. This is like riding a bicycle or any physical activity is integrated in the second half of the night. So, a person who stayed up really late till 1:30 in the morning and missed all their slow wave sleep, their memory is not so hot the next day. A person who stayed up all night, their emotional control is shot. And you know this is true. When a person has not slept, their memory is bad, they are irritable or sometimes giddy or all kinds of goofy stuff that all goes away when they finally get some good rest. Okay? By the way, you remember my sausage maker putting out the protein strands? That starts to turn way down when you go to sleep. Amyloid production turns down when you go to sleep. So, 10 o'clock, I don't care how good your book is, I don't care how great the TV show is, turn the light off, go to sleep. When you get into a groove with it, you might wake up early, but you're going to find that your brain is really working for you, is the way it should be. Okay, wait, there's more. This is Dwayne Gravelin. This is the last thing I want to tell you about. Dwayne Gravelin was a physician. He also is a physician. Also is an astronaut. He was working for NASA, and he was in his astronaut training. Got in his car, drove home, got home, got out of his car, and there was a woman there at his house. Wanted to know what she was doing there. And she looked at Dwayne and said, "Dwayne, I'm your wife." His memory had been completely wiped out. He didn't know his own wife. She sticks him in the car. They race to the emergency room. They say, "What has happened?" And eventually the clouds sort of part. And he's thinking, "What happened to me? I didn't know my own wife." The only thing he could think of is he had started taking a pill called Lipitor to control his cholesterol. One of the most popular drugs ever marketed. And it's supposed to be totally safe. It did lower his cholesterol, but he thought, maybe it's toying with my memory. He stopped it. Memory was fine. But as time went on, his cholesterol went back up, so he started the Lipitor again at half the dose. 6 weeks later, his memory banks were wiped out again for everything after junior high. He stopped the drug again. His memory gradually returned, and his Lipitor now in the trash. He's his memory is fine. Well, at first this was thought to be just a weird fluke. And many people said it couldn't be. Lipitor is fine. I mean, it does have some side effects. It can be harmful to your liver and your muscles and increase the risk of diabetes. But aside from that, no, I don't mean to. For many people, it really does bring their cholesterol down without a lot of problem. But the FDA did have to issue a report. There have now been hundreds of cases of people who had memory problems from not just Lipitor, but other statins, including people who were in nursing homes diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease that went away when they stopped the medication. Now, I don't mean to say that everybody who's on statins is being treated in a bad way. I don't mean to say that at all. A low cholesterol level is good. But what I do mean to say is we should start with diet, and whenever anybody's got any brain problem, the first place I go is to their medicine cabinet, and I open it up and I see what's there. And there's a few other things. If you ever had a colonoscopy, you go in the hospital and they're checking for colon cancer and other things, and then you put on your clothes and you walk out of the hospital and your loved one picks you up in the car and they say, "How was it? I hope it didn't hurt too much." And you say, "I don't actually remember the procedure. In fact, I don't remember anything after I walked into the hospital." It's the funniest thing. The reason you don't remember is when you were on the table, totally awake. They started an IV and they put a drug in your vein called midazolam, Versed, which happens to have the effect of wiping out your memory for anything that happened while you were there. They could have stood on the exam table and sung Old Lang Syne and broken out the beers and had a cigarette and whatever. You wouldn't remember any of it. And now for some people that's an advantage. But other people might say, "Wait a minute, I think it should be up to me if you're going to wipe out my memory." This is used in every hospital in America. They use it because it's a good induction agent, it's calming, and they feel that if you don't remember what happened, you're more likely to come back. I'm not saying don't use it. What I'm saying is you're in charge. It's your brain, your body. Talk to the anesthesiologist in advance, and they have an obligation to tell you what they're doing, because they all know that this is going to happen. They just never talk to you about it. Cholesterol-lowering drugs. We talked about sleeping medications. Ambien, very popular sleeping pill. It makes you sleep. But if you happen to wake up maybe an hour or later, be very, very careful, because while you're taking Ambien, you will not remember anything, and you'll be in sort of a party mood. Many people on Ambien find their car keys, and they go to the 7-Eleven, and they come back with barbecue potato chips and donuts and things, and in the morning they wake up and they say, "What happened here?" They have no memory of what they did whatsoever. It happens all the time. Manufacturers denied it initially. Now we know it's absolutely routine. Antidepressants, antihistamines, anxiety drugs, blood pressure medicines, acid blockers, they all have a role. Medicines are sometimes essential, but be aware that they often affect the brain. And so do physical conditions: depression, thyroid disease, infections, migraines, chemo brain. So many people say, "I had chemotherapy." I am not myself. It is not your imagination. Happens all the time, where your memory is not as good as it was, and it's one of the side effects. Gluten intolerance is not super common. Maybe 7% of people have intolerance to the protein in wheat, barley, and rye, but it manifests as digestive problems and brain fog. And I don't mean to say you should avoid gluten for most people, but if you're having brain fog, you could try and just see how you do. And if it doesn't make any difference, then you can bring gluten back into your diet. Okay, so I'm going back home now, and I'm looking at my family, and I'm making my own scorecard for myself. Did we eat a lot of bad fat? Did my grandparents eat bad? Did my father? Did I? And the answer is, of course. That was the family business, was to raise cattle. Did we get too much iron? Yes. Did we get copper? We took multiple vitamins every day that had the full day's supply of copper. My dad got a lot of aluminum in his mail-ox. Did we miss micronutrients? Frankly, we didn't know what vegetables had. We weren't thinking about them. We didn't realize that they were there to protect us. My dad was sedentary. We were all pretty sedentary. Now, lack of mental stimulation, that wasn't really my family. My father read the New England Journal and all the other medical journals all the time. But I I am convinced that you can have the most intense program of intellectual activity, and as good as that is, it cannot resist the tsunami of bad fats and heavy metals and things like that that are going to come into your diet. So you need all of these things working together. My father didn't sleep very well, and he took lots of medications, and so those are things that maybe we can think differently about. So the power plate, those are the foods that really do protect us, and that's what's really most important, is to eat in a healthful way. And I want to give you a little bit of good news. Back in 1909, the USDA started tracking Americans' meat intake. And it was already pretty high, 123.9 pounds back then. And it gradually went up, but in 2004, it peaked, 201.5 pounds of meat per person per year here in the United States. And it started to slide. Yes, our population is in rotten shape. Yes, we've got a lot of problems. But the corner is starting to turn. And we now have athletes, celebrities, an ex-president, people who are saying, you know what, forget meat. I don't really need it anymore. And meat intake has actually dropped about 6% since 2004. Our job is to keep that whole thing going and going and going. And I think we can do it. Same with chicken. Americans eat 1 million chickens per hour. 9 billion per year. But it started to fall as well. And that's a good thing.